Dr Scott Goldman is one of the world's leading sports psychologists. He is currently head of psychology for 5 high-performing sporting organisations, including the Golden State Warriors, the Minnesota Vikings, the Chicago Cubs, the New York Jets, and the USA Women's Rugby Union team. Doing research for you, you're somewhat elusive. When I look at other people in sports psychology or the performance space on mental skills, there's a lot more. There's a proliferation of material about some of our peers and colleagues. But for some reason, your impressive body of work, there's a very small digital footprint. Is that by default or design?
Wow, we're coming out with some haymakers to start the conversation. I love it. I think the field of sports psychology kind of comes from 2 domains. One domain is where you think of yourself like a coach. And when you think of yourself like a coach, there's a lot more comfortability kind of talking about your work. I'm just on the sidelines kind of doing that. The other domain is where you come from like a clinical or counseling background. And confidentiality is such a pillar of it. Now, I've tried to be comprehensive and I trained in both domains. And so I find, though, like one of my mentors, he gave me this line that I always held on to. He said, it's really easy to see where the cameras are pointed. And you can be in front of the camera or you can be behind the camera. And so I think I started out with this small footprint because I was originated in that clinical domain. And that was my space, was like, you know what? I'm of service. I'm not really a member of the team. But then as my career started to evolve, I became comfortably uncomfortable. So again, like the first time I was on the sidelines with an NFL team, I was actively avoiding the camera. Like, this is for the players. This is their moment. This is the coaches. This is their moment. And then I got to a point where I said, you know what? If the camera catches me, the camera catches me. I'm just going to focus on the work. And I let go of it. So, gosh, what a long-winded answer to say. I probably could have more of a social footprint. I just never thought of that being an important part of my work. But while you're letting me ramble, I've noticed every time I don't put myself out there, someone else is more than happy to take that space. And sometimes their motives seem less genuine. And I'm concerned about that for our field.
That's a good answer. Look, I could have started with, hey, so tell me, what are you doing for dinner tonight? How's your day been? But it intrigued me in researching, and even Shannon, our podcast researcher and producer, said, God, this guy, he's done so much. Like when I do that introduction for you, you've worked with like legendary teams, US global teams. You're working now in rugby union. But there is a really small digital footprint. So yeah, interesting, depending on the background you come from.
Well, I think part of the resume is extensive because I'm old. Like, you know, been doing this for 27 years, so I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that regard. And I think the other part is I've just been very fortunate that I haven't had to market. Like all those jobs that you just listed or those relationships, none of them was me applying for a job. That was the team found me, or we had a conversation that led to a formalized relationship. So I think I've just been very, very lucky in that regard.
2 things in response to that. Number one, you're not allowed to say old on this podcast because we want to get everyone to 90 or 100. So you're only halfway there, mate. So just say mature. I've got some maturity and I've got some experience in the bank.
Seasoned. I'm a weathered practitioner. There we go. I'll take it.
And the second thing, look, we've got to talk about the championship title, the NBA championship title in 2022. I know you're a humble man. You're not going to get your ring out of the cupboard again, are you?
No. It's just, it's good where it is.
For context for our podcast and YouTube listeners, he showed us before, Wizard Night. It's phenomenal. Got your name engraved on it. Like what a representation for you from the team to say, hey, we appreciate what you've done. That must have been a good moment. Like all the humbleness and everything aside, you must have had a moment where you sat in that office and you wouldn't have cigars, you're too healthy, maybe a little scotch or who knows, a juice, and just sat back and gone, yeah, this is pretty freaking cool.
I think there was several moments during that journey where it felt surreal. You know, the enthusiasm and the celebration, the parade, like, I think part of it is, and you know this from your work too, you watch how much time and energy and effort everyone puts into it. In my contribution, you couldn't even fill a thimble. Like, if you look at my stats for the championship finale, like my stats are 0 points, 0 rebounds, zero. So you know what I mean? Like, I'm always cautious when talking about it because I would never want to take away from what the players did, what the front office did, what the coaching staff did, what ownership did. Like, I'm humbled and I'm honored to have been on the journey with them. And I'm grateful, to your point, that they acknowledge my contribution. And I think that's what the ring means to me. It's not, getting it appraised at a jeweler or anything like that. It's just the idea that they said, hey, thank you. That
Yeah.
was neat.
We know some people would be wearing that the whole time.
They might, yeah, and where they wear it would also be kind of notable too, I guess.
It's like my parents have a friend, and we love him. He's a great family friend, but he still wears his Sydney Olympics 2000 tracksuit around. So it's like, mate, time's moved on. There's been a few Olympics since then, buddy.
Yeah, and you know what? You earned it. You can do what you want with it. I think for me, it's it's not meant for everybody else. It's meant for me. Like I think that's part of why I keep it in the closet is I know where it is, and I'm grateful that they gave me that token or gesture. I don't need everybody else to feel that or know that.
Now, let's imagine that our audience is like your basketball stats. You know, 0 watching, 0 listening. So it's just you and I in this vault now. Do you ever have a moment where you look in the mirror, just you, and just go, that was pretty freaking cool. God, like you're smiling. There must have been a couple of, like, in so psychology, we talk about making meaning when you have downtime to come up with new mental models. Do you do that? Do you purposely build in some time to come up with new mental models? But answer my question first. Have you ever gone, yeah, come on, you've done all right here?
I don't think I've ever done that, but I have definitely tried to embrace a moment. Like, the first time you're on the pitch and you just got to take it all in. Like, you're like, if my 8-year-old self could see me now, kind of thing. I've been very blessed and fortunate to have a ton of those. And I try to take a snapshot to embrace it. I'll give a little bit of love to one of your former guests, and I bet he was awesome on your podcast, Michael Gervais, right? Like you didn't you do something with him?
He was all right.
Yeah, that guy is great.
I'm winding him up. I'll send that bit to Michael. Wiz is laughing. Michael, on just the way he articulates messages, he's so crisp, so professional. There's a rigor. But what really comes out with Michael is there's an authenticity and a warmth about it. He's an oxymoron. He's a really nice guy, highly driven, yeah, deeply embedded in research, but very practical and sticky as well. Can be nice and affable, but he's got drive. So he's a real juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I consider him a friend and a colleague, and I hate the fact that we're blowing him up like this, but he's an unbelievable human being. And he, as great of a psychologist as he's even better person and a really good friend. I asked him once, I was like, how do you have such great landing spots? And he was like, I don't know. And my theory is I think it's because he comes from a surfer background. And I think surfers have their own language, like they talk about cheddar and lettuce and also. So I think he does this really cool kind of code switch where he's got great ways of phrasing that stick, to your point. But bringing it back, when I first entered the NFL, he was one of the few people, like at that time, there was only like 4 or 5 of us doing the work. And so I kind of reached out to people like him and some of the others where I'm just like, and he gave me this advice and I thought it was really sound. He said, take a moment. And I was like, I don't know. That feels weird. It feels a little. And he goes, okay, how about this then? He goes, record a video and send it to your children. That way you're kind of sharing the experience with them, but you're also taking a moment. So I did that for like the first season. Every time I went to a new stadium, I would and some stadiums are legendary, like the Green Bay Packers, Lambeau Field, unbelievable history of football. So I would take a video and that gave me a moment to kind of reflect. So that would be the closest I have to the moment that you're describing was just, hey, this is pretty cool.
great though with your camera, you can capture that. And if you look back on that in years to come, what an awesome capture of the feeling, the moment, the history in each of those stadiums. And while we're on Michael, just go back to the original question I asked you. Michael's prolific. His podcast is one of the most listened to business/wellbeing/psychology podcasts in the world. He works with Satya Nadella, the people he has on his podcast across Microsoft Leaders Defense. He's different, right? So somewhere Michael must have found that switch. This would be a great question to ask him. Gosh, I wish we had Scott Goldman on before Michael Gervais, because he dances both. He's the juxtaposition, right? He's a deep body of work as a psychologist, a traditional clinical psych, but then he's amplifying it on a global stage.
Yeah, so it's funny because he and I have had a lot of conversations about this, and I hope he'd be okay with me sharing this with your audience. He wants to change the world. Like his goal is to hit thousands of, not millions of people. And he's asked me to join him on the quest. And I told him that's not really my passion or purpose. I think for me, I'm more dialed into the person who's sitting in front of me. So, kind of going back to the moment that you're describing, like more than a place or a situation, it was oftentimes a moment in an interaction that I would feel that, where you just felt the energy with the person I was working with, whether it was the coach or the front office or a player or the owner, where I'm going like, ooh, we're kind of vibing on something really special right now. Like we're landing on some neat points. That's where I get like the goosebump kind of thing. So Gervais' quest is really about this dynamic scope and breadth. And I think my quest is really almost more of a micro engagement.
Appreciate you being so authentic. Be a pretty good marriage, you and Gervais doing some work together.
We've talked about playing in the same sandbox from time to time, and we've done a few things together that were pretty fun.
What I like about your answer on that, apart from being authentic, is you're really clear what fuels you. And I think for our audience, that's a really clear message that comes out. Yeah, you've been doing this for nearly 30 years. More if you look at your college and your sporting background as well. It's all muscle memory or nervous system memory you bring forward. But you're really clear on what you want to do. I think a lot of people aren't, Scott, and they have this whole identity based on what they do, that performance identity. When did you get clarity on what it is you want?
I think those existential moments are not pinnacle in a one swing of the bat kind of moment. I actually think that those happen in different phases and stages. So I can talk a little bit about like the moment where I first wanted to dip into psychology, which was kind of cool. I can talk about the moment where I really wanted to dip into sport. I can talk about the moment where those two kind of came together. And then I think probably the coolest moment was where I had the clarity, or my own personal aha was where I developed a personal mission statement. I found once I had that locked in, it became my rubric for decision making of what to do with my professional options and opportunities. So I'll leave it to you. Like, do you have a personal mission statement? Have you ever kind of thought about what you want to do?
I do. Good question. You can see the psychologist coming in to flip the questioning process, right? I see what you're doing here, mate. I see exactly what you're doing.
I don't know. What do you
I
think?
see through you. What do you think about that? How do you play back? Yeah, so I've got a really clear purpose, which is waking people up to reach their full potential. So if I'm working with someone who's dormant or working with someone who can go that 10%, I feel on purpose.
That's so cool. I like it. Waking people up. I think that's a really cool way to start a mission statement. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I've got a keynote this afternoon with over 1,000 people in a big stadium here at ICC in Sydney. So on that, I don't walk in there going, hey, I'm on mission. But when I'm in an audience and there's a few skeptics or a few people like, what is this stuff on leadership capacity? And you get them on board, the majority. That's when I feel like that dance, when you're working with an individual, a small group or a big group, yeah, it's totally on purpose. It's on mission.
Yeah, I mean, something I've been kind of germinating lately, especially with leaders, is everybody's talking about culture. I mean, it's not like it's a new concept, but it certainly seems to be more saturated than ever before. And I feel like culture is more a state of being than it is a state of doing. And what I mean by that is like sometimes coaches are trying to come up with the right kind of phrase or the words to put on walls that gets everybody activated. And I'm like, you know what? culture should be the equivalent of like asking a fish to describe water. Like they should be like, what are you talking about? You know, it should just be something that emanates and permeates through all aspects of the building. So it's interesting because when I'm working, like, say, with a leader, like a coach or a GM or a team president, I'm before we come up with anything, I just need to know who you are and listening to what they believe in and what is their, garbage truck kind of aha moment. And then saying, okay, if this is who you are and this is how you want your building to be, now let's craft a collective. So I was working with a head coach this morning, and it's so cool. And I don't know if he'll catch this or not, given that you're in Australia and this coach is in North America, but like he said, he's really passionate. And he's one of the most passionate coaches I know. He's really competitive. Again, one of the most competitive, and he's also highly intelligent, so he's really competent. So those were the three concepts that we sort of landed on of you don't have to worry about installing a culture as long as you just are true to yourself, which is be passionate, be competent, and be competitive. And then surround yourself with players and staff that are completely aligned. Like you don't have to ask them if they can adopt it. They should already be living it themselves.
I want to go back to the introduction. Like when I read this, I went, I've got to ask this guy, do you have a secret twin brother? Are you like, remember Brad Cooper in the movie Limitless? He was taking that special potion and he just sees shit that other people don't do? Or is there some superpower? Because when I call out the Golden State Warriors, the Minnesota Vikings, the Chicago Cubs, the New York Jets, and you just threw in before we went on air, oh yeah, I've just started with the US women's rugby team as well, leading to the World Cup. That's 5 large, successful sporting organisations. Scott, you know most sports psychs or mental skills or mental performance coaches work with one, and they tend to be there, and they'll do a bit with the coach and they'll do a little bit with the leadership group, but they tend to be there more in a one-on-one service model, which is where a lot of us come from psychology. How on earth do you sit across 5?
Not easily. And it comes with its own levels of sacrifice. Like there are things that I miss in my own personal life. I mean, not to go down this tangent, but I mean, talk about like a life work balance. But I really love what I do. I really enjoy the people that I get to do it with. I think that some of the greatest puzzles, I mean, human beings are awesome. Like in how people go about navigating their own universes is just so much fun to be engaged and be a part of. So these journeys that we go on with the people that we work with, I consider myself rewarded. So I find that there's a few things. As much as a long day can be fatiguing, I find it also very much fills a cup. So one mechanism of how you do it is really your own fortitude and you know what they say, that cliched statement, like, if you love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life. There's some truth to that. I think the other element that I learned was, so I have been that psychologist who was in the building every day. There was a team where like I literally would sleep on my couch in my office just like the coaches would and get, 3-4 hours of sleep a night and that kind of stuff. The benefit of being in the building every day is you miss nothing. But we should also acknowledge, like, compared to like strength and conditioning coaches or nutritionists and all that, like most other support services, they have their own time, they have their own space. Like, hey, we lift from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. kind of thing. But when it comes to the psychology role, you don't always have that kind of defined space in place, right? Maybe you have that one-off with the player. Maybe there's conversation in the hallway. Maybe you're presenting to the team, but it's more chaotic than it is reserved. So one of the things that I found was if you're in the building every day, you miss nothing. 2 players get into an argument, coach quits in the middle of the season, any of that kind of unscripted drama, you're right there and ready to act, be a resource. But it also means kind of like a fire extinguisher in the closet. You're also kind of sitting and waiting.
Also, Maybe you don't miss anything, but you could miss stuff because you get groupthink or you just play the same game. You go to the same car park, walk through the same front door, say hello to the same lovely receptionist, get your same coffee from the same person, the same stupid jokes to the same middle-aged men. You go to the same locker and you get stuck in that pattern of automation where I feel some of the work I do, when you go into a team you haven't been there for a couple of days, oh, what happened? Hey, you've put a pot plant there. Hey, who's that? I find it can be an advantage as well.
So there's the flip, right? And again, a lot of my discoveries of practice were unintentional. My wife just didn't want to live the life of a transitory coach where we would just be in a new location every 3 years. It's like being in the military. So I told one of the professional teams where I was working with that my wife didn't want to move to. I said, I can be in the building every day. I won't miss anything. There's your advantage. But it will be like 1,000 paper cuts versus maybe coming in and just throwing haymakers. So I said, which would you rather have? Me be here all the time and never miss anything, but be less dynamic because, to your point, it's so much of what we do is like wash, rinse, repeat. Or I can come in and just make a huge splash and impact. And they're like, ooh, we like the huge splash and impact. I go, great. So I think part of it was knowing where to stand, right? And knowing when to be and what are key moments in seasons that allow you to be the most impactful. So that's kind of how I'm able to do it. And then there's another unintended consequence, which is the Chicago Cubs are never going to play the Golden State Warriors. Like they will never compete against each other. They'll never compete for the same player or anything else. And as a result, there's a chance to cross-pollinate. Buxton, the guy who is connected to Microsoft and all that, like he talked about prospect and mining, that sometimes you can take something that's tried and true in one domain and then bring it to a new world. So one of the things like with the Warriors and most amazing ownership group I've ever been around, they are grateful when I go work for another team because they go, hey, what do they do that we can fold into our system and make us better? In fact, the Warriors are so incredible. They sometimes will send me on fact-finding missions. So this was like 2 years ago. They sent me to go meet with a bunch of English Premier League teams. So I was talking to like Chelsea and Man City and all these other teams, just with this idea of like, what can we do better for our? So I think that's the other benefit. Throw haymakers and cross-pollinate.
Love it. A wise man once said, Scott, culture is a state of being, not a state of doing.
I like it. We should patent that. I think you're onto something.
So when you go into a new organization and you look at culture, it's difficult because if you're running an S&C department or even nutrition or physio, there's metrics. So, as a former S&C coach or performance manager, you can measure strength, you can measure power, you can do skin folds. You can go do a DEXA scan. You can do a broncho or you can do a beep test and measure that anaerobic threshold. There's lots of metrics. But when you go in there as a psychologist and a change agent on culture, we'll get to AIQ. It's the best I've seen. But it's hard to get a pulse check of that organisation. So this is very much an N=1 question. But I'm sure our audience will see some real transference in this when people start with a new organisation. Like, what do they do? How do you approach it? So fresh organisation, you go in there. Do you have a framework? Is there a process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as structured. I'm a little bit more frenetic and kind of jazzy than I am. Hey, here's my system. Like, hey, this is a 5-point plan. But what I would say is, and I think you hit the nail on the head as far as treating things like N=1. So the first thing that I do is I say, I just need to learn. So I'll give you a concrete example with there was a team that asked me to help them hire and vet and provide psychological profiling of their head coach and GM candidates. And I was like, I'm happy to do that, but I don't know what you all need. I don't know who you all are. And so I can do this psychological profile, but and this is just, I'm sure you'd agree. I think teams aren't trying to fail. And I think the people that they hire or the players they draft also aren't trying to fail. But where failure occurs is when there's just this bad fit. So the first thing I do with any kind of engagement is I start off by just saying, I need to learn. And I think one of my other friends and colleagues, he'd be great on your show, Mark Aoyagi, who's currently like with the Los Angeles Dodgers. He's worked with the Denver Broncos, amazing dude. He gave me this compliment. He goes, Scott, you really listen deeply. And that phrasing and that concept meant a lot to me because I never really thought about it. So step one is I try to listen and learn. I think step two is then I try to be of service. What I've listened, what I've learned, what I've put together, what can I do to help contribute with some of the discovery? And that comes from a place and space of empirically validated practice. So when I try to contribute, I try to do it with a level of muscle and support versus me just kind of like making something up. And then I think phase 3 is I try, and it's funny, like, thank you for giving me a chance to think it through. I think, so first I listen and learn, then I try to contribute. And then I think I go back to evaluating, like Sir Alex Ferguson said, one cannot escape the playing field. One thing I love about sports psychology, you talk about strength coaches, you can watch people get bigger, right? And faster or stronger. Like, I think you can do the same thing with psychology. Like, you can see people kind of get unlocked. You can see and feel that energy of them actualizing. So I think that's the last stage is I evaluate and then circle back through the whole process all over again.
Cool process.
Thanks.
Number 1, listen and learn. 2, contribute. That's where you add the muscle. I think what a lot of people do, I did this when I first started. I've got to make a difference. And I went in there making all the noise and I didn't know the cultural frameworks or, so there's Joe. He's not really on the organisation chart in a leadership role, but I tell you what, nothing gets past him. It's often the groundkeeper, the boot stutter, someone who's just that conduit of culture. You go and have a coffee or a juice with and go, you tap into the history and what's really going on. So listen and learn, number 1. 2, then contribute, start to flex your skills. And then 3, the evaluate, but it's also making a difference. And I could see you are really... that you've been doing this for 3 decades, but you freaking love this. Like when you talk about it, your pearly white show, your dentist will be proud that you still love this, right? This is not a job for you. It's going to sound really cliched. Make your vocation feel like a vacation. But it seems like you still love this.
I think what's nice is some things you'll recognize, like, right? Some patterns and scripts, you go, I kind of know where this is going because I saw this once before 5 years ago. But then there's also just everything's new. So you're like, hey, Kirk Lacob, one of the owners for the Golden State Warriors, he said this, and I always try to give credit where credit's due. Guy is absolute brilliant genius. He thinks fast and he thinks deep. And one of the things he said, and I went, God, this is brilliant, and yet I've never heard anyone say this before. He goes, every team is a brand new team. Like every year, even if most of the players have returned, even if most of the coaches have returned, like it's still brand new. And there's something kind of exciting about, and he said that in the middle of their dynasty. So you would think like, oh no, what we've got is tried and true. He's going, nope. This is a new season. This is a new he didn't say new season. That's what I think is so cool is he said, this is a new team. It's like that Zen phrase, one cannot step into the same river twice. I'm going, gosh, man, it was just brilliant. It was just brilliant on his part.
Can I go into number 2 a little bit more? And this again is for me. So rich talking to you, loving it. When you contribute or when you start to flex your craft, to be across 5 teams, you'd obviously have some work with the coach and aligning the message with the coach and the head coaches. You'd have some work with leaders and leadership development. I'm sure you have some work around head of performance because you need a universal language. In aeronautical frames, they talk about universal language in English, but so a pilot from Japan can speak to a pilot in Germany and understand. So you have that universal language flowing across the business. Then you also have some group education or some workshops. You would then have some one-on-one. And do you have a technology platform? Do you create some IP and then distribute that across the teams as well?
Only the AIQ, that would be. But I mean, if you're talking about like materials and stuff, yeah, like there are some things that I've created, like some handouts and some other mechanisms or exercises. Yeah, yeah. I guess the short answer is yeah. I've got a few magic tricks that I
Mm.
pull out.
So that blend though between some education, some work with the players, a bit of jazz, because like teams are ruthless. Like you get in front of a sporting team, men or women, and you stuff up that first presentation you do in front of the team. Doesn't matter how good your onboarding is. Doesn't matter your CV of work. They go, this guy's a fucking clown. You're out of the
That's right.
building. Yeah.
Well, I think what's true, regardless of sport, I guess this would be maybe a potential universal truth, is the locker room doesn't lie. And like there was a team I was working for where a free agent who had been with the team for a week and a half knocked on my door and was like, "Can I come in?" I was like, "Sure." And he goes, "Hey, I kind of vetted you out in the locker room, and they all said that you're a good dude. We can trust you, and you're really helpful." Like it doesn't get any, but that's the ultimate endorsement. Like the locker room doesn't lie. So to your point, whether you're in front of the team, whether you're one on one, I think if you do deep, meaningful work, it has its impact in whatever way it does. You make it about them, not about you. It permeates through the building where people go, "Oh, like he's one of us, or he's here for us, or he's about us." And there was another team where the coach actually gave me the space in front of the team every Friday, which is games were on Sunday. So it was like the last meeting of the week, really, for preparation. And we would end with, and it was interesting because I never thought about that assignment's impact until one of the players pointed out to me, like, you realize you and the head coach are the only two people that talk to the entire team every week. So your message better be good. And I was like, dude, challenge accepted. Like, he kind of said it with a smile and a wink, but he also put me on notice. And I was like, all right, I cannot clown around and just come up with some parlor trick or some, cliched, be the ball, win the ball. So I took his challenge and invitation very, very seriously. And I said, whatever I put in front of the team, it better throw a haymaker and it better come from some substance.
You have a magic whiteboard and you look at on a Sunday how I'm going to spend the week. Like, do I do a workshop? Do I connect with the coach? Is there this elaborate plan? Because when I read out your career, it sounds like you sat down at a young age and you just mapped out this blend of I'm going to be a psych, I'll work with this team, get some consulting skills, and here I am. Or do you just bumble your way through all this shit like the rest of us and you've landed in this magic spot?
Yeah, I think Bumble sounds about right. I mean, I think the reality is most of the places and teams I've worked for, I was the first one in the building. And the luxury and curse, because it was both, the luxury of it was I got to forge it the way I wanted to do it. The curse was no one had paved the road for me. So what I found was you better be ready. You better be ready for the moments. So I find I lean on a lot of friends and colleagues, Gervais, Aoyagi, Angus Mugford, another one that I consider to be a dear friend and colleague. Like, just the idea of shared wisdom. I try to read, I try to take and conceptualize ideas. So it's not like I have a whiteboard and it's not like I even had a vision board or intentionality. I think this would be another example. You're asking a question I don't have an answer to, which is awesome. So thank you for that. That's a neat challenge. There was a head coach in the NFL when he offered me the job. I have a tendency to ask a lot of questions. So he offered me the job, and I think most people would have just taken it. And I said, "Well, you got to help me understand what is the job." He's like, "I don't know, Goldman. Like, why do you got to do all that?" I go, "Well, what is it that you think I do here?" Because he wanted to experiment. He had me kind of come out for a few visits, and then after the third or fourth on site, he's like, "I want a full-time jobby kind of thing." And I was like, "Okay, what do you think I do?" He goes, "I don't know." He goes, "This is what I do know. I see you running around, I see you talking to people, and then I see them feeling better and playing better after that happens." And then he said, "You also help me out." And I went, "All right, you have an amazing read on people." I mean, it's interesting, like your sort of synopsis of Gervais is pretty spot on, and I'm learning a lot about myself from our conversation, so that's kind of neat.
Appreciate that coming from you. Let's just wrap this shit up now. Like,
There's your mic drop. Yeah.
there's our set. Look, and I love conversations like this. That's why I love a podcast. And you get to talk to great people and have an open conversation. So I really appreciate you for turning up and not just pressing play in jazz hands. You got it. You don't play. I can see the bit of showmanship, and you got to have a bit of show when you're doing the teams you're doing. I think you've got an unconscious competence. And even when we ask that and pulled on the thread, you listen and learn, you contribute in multiple ways, and you make people feel better. Now, you don't get that in a degree, right? Okay, we're going to teach you to feel better. That just comes from years of experience and listening and not having your head up your ass and enough confidence to flex when you need to, but that growth mindset, adaptability to keep learning and growing. And I can see you love the impact you get to make. You love when you see the players and teams you work with grow, learn, win.
I think you're pretty spot on there. I think you're onto it. Yeah.
One person I do want to talk about, Steve Kerr. Now, when you Google him, he's got a little bit more on Wikipedia than you, mate.
Yeah, he's incredible, incredible human being.
5-time NBA champion as a player, 4 times NBA champion as a coach. He's won an Olympic gold medal as an athlete and an Olympic gold medal as a coach. I do not know any athlete globally who comes close to that as far as one of the best. Like, he was arguably rock star team, one of the link players, a great player, but he had some of the greatest in that team. Most elite coaches were good athletes, not great, but he's an anomaly on all that. So I'd just love to know a little bit about Steve. What have you learnt from him? What makes him so different?
I don't even know where to start. He is brilliant. I mean, honestly, I think he's brilliant. And where I have a lot of compassion for him is how many people want his time and attention. I don't know how he does it. I really don't. Brilliant human being, emotional intelligence through the roof, kind, charismatic, has the ability and the conviction to say the things that are important. I mean, some of the incidences where he'll speak up even politically, I'm like, gosh, man, there's some risk to that. I value him as a human being, and I'm grateful to be able to watch him work. It's great.
What was your first conversation with him like? Do you remember what it was? How did you feel?
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome? Were you trying to be cool? Go back to that.
No. So it was interesting because I was driving across country and he was driving in the mountains. So our conversation kept getting disrupted, which kind of sucked. But here's where I give him a lot of credit is he kept calling me back. Like, our calls would get disconnected and they call me right back. So there was this cool engagement. But I asked him mostly about his journey and his story. I find culture is really just the extension of the leader's psyche. So I was curious, and I asked him about, what it was like to play alongside Michael Jordan and stuff. So I asked him about, at Arizona, one of his assistant staffs is a guy named Q. And the name Q comes because he asked a lot of questions. And so Q was at Arizona with Steve Kerr. And the way Q tells the story is, as Steve was working on a shot, Q was rebounding and would just ask him questions. And they forged this meaningful relationship that's now decades old. And so I was learning about how relational Coach Kerr is, and how people like Q, his real name's Bruce, but like people like Q will follow him and will do whatever it takes to make him successful or to be a part of that. Like, just special person.
So back to your model that we've now framed, the 3 steps. Everyone needs 3 steps. Forget 4, 5's too many. 2's not enough. But you listened and learned.
I tried to, though, like I said, we kept going through dead zones. So it was somewhat interrupted, but I just remember he also was really transparent and honest with me. He was telling me some things about the organization where I was like, oh, like this is an interesting kind of quote unquote first date. So there was like a fearlessness and an honesty and integrity that I thought was really, really neat.
You just set me up beautifully as a segue for the next part because I wanted to talk about fear. So there's an article in The Guardian last year which is talking about fear as being the basis of human psychology. They reference Goldman says he tries to work with players on a number of levels, but the first thing I do is I listen and I try to really understand what's going on for this person. Fans see athletes and coaches as immune from stress and fear because they're well paid and famous. And in this article, you explore self-doubt and how fear impacts NBA players. You highlight cases like Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz. I've probably mucked up that pronunciation. Apologies, Markelle, who've struggled with their shooting due to anxiety and pressure. And you talk about yips and where athletes lose that ability. But I really liked that article because I don't think enough people talk about fear. We tend to go, oh, no, just let's do all the front loading and let's make you calm under pressure. But talk to us. What is fear? How do you approach teaching athletes about fear and navigating or managing it?
Oh, buckle in. I mean, that's a long context. I think there's a couple of things. I notice that we have an easier time telling other people to be fearless than we might hold ourselves accountable. That's something I often like to hold a mirror up to other psych providers. Is I'm like, when was the last time you had like an all-in moment where you gambled everything? Like, with the AIQ, I took all of my life savings and I put it into that thing. And granted, it was at a time in my life where my life savings wasn't, six figures, but still, it was all that I had in the moment. And so, same thing, like I could have worked at the University of Michigan in the safety and security at the college level. I could have done that for 30 years and retired. And when I went into the pro space where job security is like a fart in the wind, like there's a couple of different moments in my life where I've completely uprooted everything and went for it. I find it paradoxical where some practitioners in the psych industry will encourage fearlessness and yet have never left the dangers of their own office. So I think something else that I embrace is when I'm talking with athletes, coaches, front office folks, that I think they respond well to the fact that I'm not so flippant with their moments of doubt or uncertainty. So I haven't even answered your question yet. I've only just kind of set up a preamble here. We know a couple things to be true. One of them is the way the brain works is fascinating and complicated. When we are faced with unknown, we have been hardwired, whether that's through intelligent design or evolution or whatever you want to say, but there is a mechanism that says when information is unknown, the human brain will tend to fill that unknown with negative. And that kind of makes sense from a practical standpoint. Like if I don't know what's behind in those doors, to assume that there's a zombie apocalypse there makes me a lot more cautious in my approach.
And it kept us alive, evolution for thousands of years. You had to look at what was above, below, and sideways. So that default has kept us alive. Yet it's a very different world now. Yet it's very different playing sport.
Yeah, like the appendix. Most people don't know what your appendix does, your appendices. The reality is it digests lignin, which is tree bark. So there was a time and a place and a space where we used to eat tree bark. That was part of our diet. We don't do that anymore. At least most people I know don't do that anymore. But our appendices still exist in us. What's interesting is, even though it doesn't do anything for modern humans, it can still get poisoned. It can still go weird or wonky. You can still get appendicitis. And if it bursts, it can kill you. So there is this mechanism that I think is kind of fascinating, right? Which is like the number one phobia in the world is snakes. But more people die by car crashes than they do by snakes. So going back to evolution or intelligent design or whatever plan you believe, one of the concepts that people have talked about is that fear actually gets imprinted in our DNA. And snakes being one of the original threats has been something we've survived for thousands of years kind of thing. So whereas cars are relatively new. The number two phobia, by the way, is social phobia, rejection. So again, going back to our ability to be tribal and our ability to connect with one another, the idea of getting kicked out of the cave was such a threat to society. So going back to fear, I think one concept from a philosophical standpoint is unknown gets twisted to negative, survival. And so one recalibration to that is to remind ourselves that unknown is neither good nor bad. It is just unknown. I do not know what's behind you right now. Could be a pot of gold. It could be Evangeline Lilly or Margot Robbie, I guess. Let's go Margot Robbie because y'all are in Australia. Or it could be, again, murder hornets kind of thing. But if we just hold to the space of unknown as unknown without giving it an emotional label or even a directional flip, that in and of itself can be liberating. The other thing we know, and this goes to my training, I was trained by a guy named Albert Ellis, who is one of the pioneers of psychology. Like he was on the Mount Rushmore, like the American Psychological Association tabbed him as one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. And he actually has an institute in Australia, the Albert Ellis Institute in Australia. Rational motor behavior therapy is his origin. Brilliant man, unbelievably fortunate to have been trained by him. And what he taught me was that anxiety and fear is a future-oriented emotion. That we don't worry about the present, we worry about the repercussions or the outcome of the present. So if you're taking a math test, or if you've got a big game or a big shot or anything else, you don't worry about the shot or the test. You worry about the reaction. That goes back to the social phobia or anything else. Yeah. So he said, he broke down fear beautifully for me, which was one, fear is about the future. Two, it's always about some kind of perceived threat or danger. And I always like to underline the word perceived because it might not be real. Again, I don't know what's over there, but I'm going to perceive it to be a threat. And then three was, he said, there's two types of threats. One is an ego threat. Like if I fail, then I am a failure. If I lose, then I'm a loser. The other is a reality threat. If I fail, I will lose my job. And if I lose my job, I'm living in a van down by the river. And again, that's still perceived. And then his theory and his mechanism was really about being aware of one's thoughts and how their thoughts induce the emotion, and then the emotion impacts the behavior. So we did kind of a philosophical approach. We did a psychological approach. I would add a scientific approach, which is Mauer's two-factor theory of avoidance, two-factor learning theory. What Maurer said, which I really believe, is that we are classically conditioned by a critical incident, like getting bit by a dog. But then that conditions us to know that dogs are dangerous. But then every time we avoid the dog, it actually makes the fear more solidified and it makes the fear grander. So what can happen is someone gets bit by a dog, now they're afraid of dogs, then they're afraid of going outside, that kind of thing. So you'll see this sometimes like with athletes where they might miss a game-winning shot or they might have a really noxious event. And then it blooms and blossoms as they tend to avoid the aspects of said event. There is a guy, so sorry, Mauer's two-factor learning thing, just to finish that. The fear is acquired through classical conditioning. Something happens, critical incident, but then it's maintained and exacerbated through operant conditioning, which is the more we avoid something, the more relief we get. So what's interesting is if you look at that theory and you look at that practice, the anxiolytic response lasts for about 3 minutes. If you expose somebody to a stimulus that is anxiety inducing, and they tolerate the discomfort for 3 minutes, their body will reset back to normalcy. You're afraid of a snake and you're locked in a room with a snake, boom. 3 minutes, it goes away. If you have the ability to get out of the room, it'll still go away in 3 minutes, but you'll attribute leaving the room as your source of relief versus just, hey, we just acclimated to it. So one of my contributions to this industry and this world was I found that you can help people be exposed to their fear stimulus longer through incompatible responses. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you're afraid of snakes, but you haven't eaten for 3 days, so you're starving. If there was a snake pit with the best looking pizza you've ever seen in your life, your hunger drive to go after that pizza will override your fear drive of avoiding the snake. So other things that, it's not just food hunger, it can also be a sexual drive. Like, again, if it's, Margot Robbie and she's willing to go on a date with you, but she has a pet snake, like, you might overcome that fear.
It's better than watching snakes while you eat pizza. Well, I thought that was a good business idea. I thought, here we go. Niche market.
Yeah, there's a lot of options.
What I see that you do beautifully is that linking on models, and they say that happens to us in our 50s as well. In the 40s, the research shows a lot of the neuroscience, working memory is better, but that ability to draw patterns and make reasoning in 50s, I just see you doing that, bang, bang, bang.
Oh, neat. Yeah, that's cool. Well, and so, and I don't know if you want me to continue because there's a couple more thoughts there.
But before you do, does that resonate with you in the mastery? Yeah, how you could just go bang, 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 thread, pull it back. I'm starting to see how you do 5 teams.
One of the things, another colleague said this about me, and it really resonates. He goes, you say things that seem very common or simple to you because you thought them up. You don't realize how much it changes other people's lives. And I was like, God, what an amazing compliment that he caught that. Because it's right. Like, it's funny because you kind of just did the same thing, which is, I'm just kind of spitballing off the top of my head. Like, this is not a script or a something like pulling up a song on an iPad. This is just, you asked a question that I wasn't really prepared to answer, and it's just coming to me. And I think everybody kind of knows this stuff, but maybe that's not the case. So going back to my contribution was hunger, sexual drive, like those things are known and true, but like you can't always generate that on a whim. Like I wouldn't tell a player to starve themselves just so they would feel confident or get rid of their anxiety as they go out on the playing pitch. But what you can also do is you can tap into the physiology of anxiety. Like you're talking about your biosocial, right? Is like heart beats fast, eyes dilate, that kind of stuff. Confidence and tapping into a previous experience of success and using the physiology of how it felt when you had that shining moment can really also turn off. So the same way, like you can't flex and relax a muscle at the same time. And a lot of the literature, again, Swin, Wolpe, Jacobson, like all of those kind of like relaxation, kind of incompatible response stuff. But you don't want athletes to relax. You want them to stay alert. So I switched it to confidence. I said, and this goes back to another friend and colleague who's a brilliant mind. If you really want to have your mind blown, this guy, Hap Davis, Hap Davis started with his work with refugees. I mean, talk about meaningful work. And then kind of ended up migrating into working with Canadian Olympic teams and NHL teams and stuff. Hap has a few brilliant discoveries, but one of them, while we're talking about fear, was he recognized similarities between the post-traumatic stress reaction of refugees and those that failed to qualify for the Olympics. Now, they're not comparable in reality of like life threat and danger and impact and burden, but where they are comparable is in the emotional construct. So what he called it was a refugee would have a capital T post-traumatic stress reaction, capital T. But the guy who missed the game-winning shot would have a lowercase t post-traumatic stress reaction. So going back to Maurer and looking for that critical incident, sometimes when people are talking about their moments of doubt or their fear and anxiety, you go, okay, well, where did that seed get planted? And that's where you look at some of Hap Davis's research on the lowercase t trauma, and then you try to unpack that. And that can be really meaningful. So it's interesting, and thanks for letting me just wax poetic. Maybe your audience are mostly insomniacs, and this is exactly what they needed to get a good night's rest. But I think there becomes an interesting choice. This is another one where Michael Gervais and I will get into an interesting debate about. He says in the world of sports, the level of depth that most people want is just maybe through the alphabet ABC. Whereas, as you're noticing, even in this conversation, I tend to go kind of like all the way to like LMNOP.
And jump to T, back to J, B. It's that pattern recognition that comes with doing this. That's my view. It's the pattern recognition. And I love that you don't just have the crafted bang, bang. Like I can see you thinking and reflecting as we're having the conversation as well.
Yeah. So I think what some people might do, especially going back to your van with tools, is a player goes to them and says, hey, I've got a lot of fear. And they go, well, let's just do a relabeling thing, which is a good technique, right? Relabeling. When your heart's beating fast, instead of telling yourself you're anxious, just tell yourself you're excited, right? And that's ABC. But I'm kind of going like, hey, help me understand where this comes from. How did this originate? How did it plant seed? How did it take root? And then I try to go to the van and say, you know what? This one requires more of a hammer. This one requires more of an Allen wrench. But I have found depth in the work when given the space to do it has a much longer stick and a much stronger resonance. What's hard is you just can't get that in a 140 character tweet. So going back, this is like, I think what they call in the world of entertainment, like a callback. The first question, why don't you have much of a social media presence? I think it's because I don't know how to take the complexity of human beings and the complexity of human interaction and simplify it to something that would be 140 characters.
I think it also might be because you're so busy reading Albert Ellis biopsychosocial model Mao. There's a lot of constructs. Hey, I like that analogy. Can we go A, B, C, D, E, F, and we'll stick on F? Failure. I think we've mentioned him too many times, so this is the last time we mentioned Gervais on your podcast today. But Michael opened up.
I like sharing with colleagues. I think success through collaboration is awesome.
I'm winding him up. But Michael talks about when they won the first Super Bowl with Seattle, and then they went back the following year, which is like it's hard to get to a Super Bowl, like ridiculously hard to win. To do two in a row, that's legendary stuff. And they were within a minute of back-to-back Super Bowl championships. Michael said when he looks back, I asked him the question, what would you do differently? He said, I didn't prepare my athletes for failure.
We did not prepare individuals or the team in general on how to deal with quote unquote failure. So when we got back to the Super Bowl the second year, which is extremely hard to do, and we lost in dramatic fashion, seconds to go on the half-yard line, and we turned the ball over.
Play clock at 5. Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal.
Right after that, we're in the locker room. I've never seen or experienced the intensity of agitating emotions at the scale that was happening in that locker room. It was, I'll use the word again, it was remarkable. It was incredible. 6'8" is crying. 6'6" is like overwhelmed, just he's glassy-eyed looking around for an answer. 6'3" next to me is unraveling his wraps around his hand, and he's screaming, why? It was the most intense sadness, anger, agitation, unsettledness that I've ever felt, full tilt. And we didn't recover. We did not prepare the men in that room to deal with the quote-unquote failure. We didn't have the right framework to deal with that type of, you could call it whatever, adversity, loss, whatever.
I found that really interesting. So on our A, B, C, D, E, beep, 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 F, do you prepare your athletes for failure?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. I think I try to, going back to Albert Ellis talked about acceptance being, and I love this definition, it's a non-judgmental awareness of being. So I'm not so sure that I try to prepare or train people for failure as much as I try to help them accept non-judgmental awareness of being, accept that what's about to happen is unknown. We might win, we might lose. Honestly, we just don't know. And we won't know until we go out there and do it and see what happens. So let's go. I like to think about modern players, not comparing them to previous players, like who's the next Kobe Bryant. I like to think of them as more like explorers. Who's the next Ponce de Leon? Who's the next Cortez, kind of thing. Like, I just think what's asked of them is to go on a quest of uncertainty. So do I say, hey, let's talk about getting ready for failure, or let's embrace failure, or think about accepting failure being a part of the process? I think it's really a matter of embracing the unknown. And if part of the unknown has a negative tinge, that we can roll with that. Dave Chappelle has this great
Love Dave Chappelle.
story. Me too. I think that, and like comedians are modern day philosophers. I love comedians and psychologists. I've always thought it'd be cool. Here's a TV show idea or a podcast idea. I'd like to get a psychologist, a comedian, and a religious figure, like a rabbi or a priest. And I think it sounds like a joke. And I think it would be a great show, is we're all having a beer. So the idea would be like a psychologist, a comedian, and a rabbi walk into a bar is the concept. But what you notice about all three is they study and observe human behavior in a very meaningful way, but with three very different sources of exploration. So going back to Dave Chappelle, sorry, I'm all over the place.
I'm just going to write that down. You'll see this pop up on Netflix. A psychologist, a comedian, a rabbi. Yeah. I love the thinking around that, though, because you're right. Each one of those has a fundamental understanding of human behavior and communication and needs and response, delivered in a very, very different format.
I mean, Larry David, who I think is also a genius, don't know him personally, but he sees things and then taps into it and everybody resonates. Like, yeah, why is opening a pickle jar so tough? And why is it that everybody has to interrupt you while you're opening it and say, hey, I got this? Like, that is such a great capture of our desire to be of service to others, kind of thing. So going back to Dave Chappelle, he tells this beautiful story about the first time he bombed. He's like, I never bombed before, and people were booing me. And who's booing a child who's just pursuing their dreams, kind of thing? Then he goes, after experiencing that, I realized this is not so bad. And from that moment on, I became fearless.
And that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Wow. Best thing, because before that time, I had never bombed, let alone got booed off stage. And bombing was horrifying. Nobody wants to bomb. Nobody, when people say you do comedy, what happens if nobody laughs? I don't know. So that night was liberating because I failed so far beyond my wildest nightmares of failing that it was like, hey, they're all booing. My friends are here watching, my mom. This is not that bad.
And I always thought, man, that's a really cool liberation. So sometimes I'll show that clip to players. Hey, you missed the shot. We lost the game. Let me tell you, and let me show you what Dave Chappelle tapped into from that moment. What we tell ourselves about these moments in lives can be liberating or imprisoning, right? You missed a shot. Now what? Hey, that's not so bad. I can survive that. Great, here we go. Or we missed a shot. holy cow, I'm going to get fired and this sucks and I'm the worst and blah, blah, blah. And on that speed run treadmill we go. So I don't know if I would say I prepare them for failure, but I do like the idea of preparing them to accept the uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, going back to that quote, unknown is neither good or bad. It is just unknown. I can hear threads of stoicism, mindfulness. You're talking about confidence. There's multiple mental skills. You'd have pre-performance routines. You'd be using mental imagery, self-talk, reflection. As you're talking, you're just going bing, 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 bing. So while you may not have gone absolutely double click on preparing for failure, you're giving them the skills and the resilience as far as the psychological resilience to adapt when it happens. Hey, I'm conscious of time. Two things. You got to go to bed soon, and I've got to get to a meeting with one of my coaches. And you know what it's like. You never rock into a head coach meeting late, and it would be totally remiss if we don't go into AIQ. We could, honestly, I'm going to listen back to this and go, I want to talk about that and that. We're going to have to get you back on.
Yeah. Well, look, why don't we get Gervais, given how much time and airspace, why don't the three of us get back on? See what that's like.
Honestly, I just have had a physiological response when you said that.
That's funny. Yeah, no, yeah, I'm happy to come back on.
Let's do that. Let's get you, me, Gervais. That'd be great.
Well, and a rabbi.
And a rabbi. Yeah. And maybe a nun and
No, I'm totally on board.
And Dave Chappelle.
Yeah. You've asked some brilliant questions, and probably this is my fault. What's the old adage? If I had more time, I would have written a shorter novel. I should have been more succinct in my thought process.
No, it's a podcast, and podcast is long format. This is not Twitter, 140 characters. And thank you for saying that. I appreciate coming from you. That means a lot, mate. It means a lot. AIQ, created for sports, specific intelligence, developed by Dr. Jim Bowman and yourself. The AIQ measures intelligence that is most relevant to athletic performance. Physical factors that impact success are relatively easy to measure, while mental factors are not. Insert AIQ. This is a massive body of work for you. You've been doing this for years and years and years. It is the closest thing I've seen to actually being able to sit down with an athlete and a team and go, that's where your strengths are, that's where your challenges are, and you can actually measure it. Well done. Well done.
Thank you. And a lot of credit goes to my partner, Jim Bowman, who is unbelievably tolerant and also brilliant. So it'll be interesting, to your point, as we get older, we start to think a little bit about legacy and contributions and how will we be remembered. And if I'm only remembered for the AIQ, I would consider that to be a blessed life. The origin of it was, I've never met a player who really likes to get motherfucked. And I've never met a coach who really likes to motherfuck a player. And I think where that frustration stems from is the old adage of they either don't know or they don't care. And we just default to they don't care. But I think in reality, it could be that they don't know, that people process differently. We know how to measure speed. We can have people run, and we can have big people run, and we can have thin people run. And we know that their pace of running will not be the same. But we kind of assume that everybody digests the information and processes the game of sport. Or
here's an umbrella. We'll do a couple of mind gyms and have a couple of things on the wall, a few mnemonics. Bang, we're performed.
Yeah, everybody could use a little, attention grid kind of thing. When it's no, some people need it more than others kind of thing. So I think a comprehensive athletic profile consists of 4 domains. There's your physical. Are you big, strong, fast? There's your knowledge or your experience, right? What was your playing style? Where were you training? Were you in an academy? That kind of stuff. Then there's personality. Are you locker room poison, or are you a glue guy? And then there's intelligence, which is, again, the ability to think of sport as this chaotic, ever-evolving, mutating puzzle. And you're going, how do I make these pieces fit? How do I win this line out? How do I convert this point? All of these kinds of things that happen in sport are really just a series of puzzles that are really challenging. So the way I like to explain it to coaches and presidents and front office folks is I go, a player's intelligence, it exists whether you measure it or not. It's no different than the couch in your living room. The couch is there whether you turn the lights on or off. Don't you think it would be helpful to know where the couch is so you know where to sit and also where not to trip? Going back to the good fit, if you have a player who's more concrete in thinking, but you run a really sophisticated offense, there's going to be a struggle. You're going to get frustrated. They're going to get frustrated. Motherfucks happen. But if you have a choice, do I simplify my offense for him, or do I let him go be good for someone else, knowing he can't be great for us? And let's find somebody who fits intellectually, can problem solve, and do pre-snap reads in the NFL, or has great floor spacing in the NBA. Like, these are cognitive traits that we can measure and provide. So with the AIQ, we help with talent identification, getting the right people on the bus. We also help with post-selection, like, okay, this is who we have. How do we put them in positions of success? And sometimes that can be about switching a guy from a midi to a forward or a fullback. Or sometimes it can be about schemes and plays fitting to their style. Like, oh, this person benefits more from having the game in front of them rather than having the game behind them and having to rotate. Simple, stupid stuff.
So you think straight away of the quarterback in NFL, or you think about your number 10, or if fly half in rugby union. It's critical, right? And they're front loading all that information at the start of the week. What's the game plan? There's multiple plays. It's the big learning I'm sure you've got with rugby union as well, with the line out. There's just so many different calls.
And mutations, that's right.
Yeah, so I'm excited because I'm going to start using this with some of the athletes and teams I'm working with. So I'm really excited to actually have a framework to help me and to help coaches with some of their players.
I mean, what's amazing is, we started in North America, but there's this gentleman, Adam Billing, who found us from Australia. I mean, he's brilliant. He comes from a rugby background. He's like, mate, I think this would be really good in us. So sure enough, he brought it to Australia, and now he's brought the AIQ to AFL. He's brought it to rugby union, rugby league, and also we're now in Europe, working with the English Premier League. It's amazing. And I think the thing that's going back to the legacy concept of it is, when Jim and I started to germinate on this, we just wanted to help. We just wanted to help the coach. We just wanted to help the player, and we wanted to help the relationship. And to know that this thing is now contributing by providing clarity and understanding of what people can do, or ways to help them offset a wobble, and that it's being done all over the world, it almost brings tears to my eyes. It's awesome.
And we'll put a link in the show notes for people to check out AIQ and the teams, the list you're working with, and what it involves. We've come full circle, and I didn't realise this. It's the joy of a conversation when you've got someone who's totally connected, but honest and open and thinking and reflecting. I've really enjoyed that, mate. You're not just pressing play, repeat. Maybe it's because you don't do a lot of interviews. Maybe it's just we can't find you on social media. But I've answered the question. How do you work with the Golden State Warriors, the Minnesota Vikings, the Chicago Cubs, the New York Jets, and recently the USA Women's Rugby program? You do the AIQ to start. Like that's been a big, got it now, you clever mofo. You go in, you listen and learn, before you get on the tools and contribute. And then number 3, you evaluate and you glow and enjoy. But this must really help you, or does. I think I've answered the question that I first asked you at the start. It's just taken me 90 minutes to get there.
Well, it's interesting because I have found there are times where the AIQ has been a wonderful entry point, and then there's other times where it's the reverse, where it's the relationship that I had with the organization that allows me to bring the AIQ. So I have found my relationship with the AIQ seems to be of mutual benefit, where sometimes it helps me fold in, and sometimes I'm able to fold it in. So I think it works both ways. It's bi-directional versus it being like my backdoor code.
And you're an authentic salesperson. You're not going there with a shiny suit and a number of orders. It's something that's done in service of to give you better content. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah. You're very good at what you do. And it's amazing how quickly you've dialed into certain aspects of my thought process. I was like, oh shit, this guy can see through me, kind of thing. I was like, oh, here we go. Like, So that's a neat experience. Not everybody can do that.
This guy's doing a me on me. This is not meant to happen.
I embrace that kind of reflection.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hello, it's Andrew. I'm back to do a reflection. And when we're doing a reflection on performance psychology and mental skills, the person I grabbed is Aaron Walsh. We've done a few of these. You're back in New Zealand, having recently travelled around the world, leading mental skills, mental performance coach. Walshy, how are you?
Good, mate. It's cold. I mean, we're in the throes of winter here, which isn't really that dramatically cold, but a bit different from Portugal last week, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I've looked at you the last month. I'm living through you vicariously. I'm in Melbourne at the moment as well, in Wallabies Camp. It's a bit fresh here. Hey, the interview with Scott Goldman, I'll start with my biggest reflection, and then I'm curious. Normally we're aligned. Let's see if we're aligned on this one as well. I just didn't know how he worked with 5 leading teams. And it came out at the end of the podcast. That's how he does it. His assessment tool, the AIQ. So he does that assessment tool. He finds out the levers on players, what their motivators are, and that gives him a head start. That was my biggest takeout on this one, mate, because, I work with a couple of teams. You work with a couple of teams. The majority of people in this space, especially those that come from a psychology background, tend to work with one team full-time, embedded in the program, mainly one-on-one. So I really enjoyed talking to someone like Scott, who had a model that's probably the closest I've seen to the model I've got. Now, my model has evolved, not working full-time because I still run a business, but that was the big thing I took out of it. Hey, I don't necessarily think you have to be with a team full-time. It can actually be an advantage. But he's got a tool to actually find out where the athletes are, especially around some of those mental skills, that gives him a head start. That was my key reflection.
Yeah, I'd love to see a schedule. That would be interesting to me.
I asked a question on that. You have some sort of magic whiteboard? And he said, no, it sounded like it's a bit like yours in my life. Sometimes you just go, oh, shit, hang on, here comes a big week.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting, like the question I had around it was just, like each team's different. And what I liked about what he said, and I definitely agree with him on, is I think there is Stockholm syndrome when you work with one team, that you just, you call it groupthink. It's the same idea of you just fail to pick up on things that need to be picked up on. And I've known from my experience going in and out, being with multiple teams, being overseas for a few months and coming back with the same team you've been with for a while, I think you do have a different lens on. So I think there's a real helpfulness in going, okay, well, I haven't been, there's a danger, because if you don't understand the narrative of the team, then you inject yourself. And I think it can, I think a couple of years ago with the Chiefs, I was away at either a Six Nations. I came back and I picked up on stuff, but I was probably too aggressive in my, assumptions, thinking, well, I'm now looking at a different lens. But there was a whole story behind that I didn't capture well enough. And I think it can be disruptive if you, I think it's a 50-50, isn't it, really? Like, if you miss out on the journey and the story and the background and what's happening, then you can make some conclusions that might not be spot on, but also not being there every day allows you to probably think independently.
Yeah, and I think not being there every day, as long as you've got the core frameworks, and those core frameworks being what is your mental skills model, or what is your leadership approach? How does that fit in with the head coach? And I'm sure he does that as well. He was very strategic, and there was a consulting-based approach, but he did say, even off air, that it wasn't through design. It was more through doing it for a number of years. Scott started just doing the traditional model, which was one-on-one, and evolved to, hey, I think I can do this better. And through demand, because he just had so many teams willing to work with him.
I imagine what he has to probably figure out pretty quickly is what his impact's going to be. Because I know if he's on a NFL team, there's 50 to 60 athletes. MLB carry 25. So rugby team would carry 35, 40. So you're not going to touch everyone, are you? If you've got 5 teams, you've probably got, I think he'd probably have to be pretty clear on what's the expectations of my work? What would success look like for these teams? How are they measuring my impact, why I'm there? I think he'd have to be really clear on those from an alignment perspective with the key stakeholders else. I could imagine, if you're in a building and a lot of people want your time and you're not able to deliver that doesn't always work out well, does it either?
No, he did mention that, being really clear on what success is for the coach. That example with Steve Kerr, that it was more reciprocal, that he was being interviewed by Steve Kerr and he was also interviewing Steve Kerr. to see whether they were the right fit. And then, being really clear on what is success. I think that's for any job. So for anyone listening to this, whether you're in elite sport, whether it's performing arts, a student in your workforce, in defense, we've got a broad range, entrepreneurs, SMEs, any business, any endeavor, you've got to be really clear what those metrics are.
And I think also it gives you a good perspective on, I looked at it and go, I couldn't do that. There's no way in the world. That doesn't suit the way that I practice, doesn't suit the way that I would operate. But huge kudos for him because he's able to capture that and do the quality work. It's just something I looked at and go, man, I'm not saying he doesn't, but for me, the relationships, going deep, connecting, getting to know the people and the time I know that takes and all of that. And even though the tool provides that, I think there's still magic in the human relationship that.
So hang on, that's interesting. So when you listened to it, you thought there's no way that you could work across 5 teams at the one time.
No way. It just doesn't suit my practice style. And I think that's not a good or a bad thing. It just is. I think everyone has a little bit of a different style in the way that they approach the teams they work with. I would rather have few and go deep as I possibly can with those teams and really get to know the inner workings of both the people, the organization, and that just takes time. So I can't imagine trying to do that. I couldn't do that across 5 teams. So it's probably not something that I could do, but listen, I have limited bandwidth. So his capacity is probably a hell of a lot higher.
Love a bit of contrarian discussion on a reflection, Walshy. I was thinking I've got to up the game because I'm working across 2, a little bit of consulting. I thought if I was full-time, only doing mental skills, 5 would stretch me. Couldn't do 5, but I actually was thinking, could I do 3 or 4? Good segue. A couple of weeks, we're releasing a podcast that you and I recorded on 5 different types of mental skills programs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a good, I think, this is where...
Did you like my little plug there for everyone coming up?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect anything less from a man like you, mate. I think, listen, it goes back to the way you operate with athletes. It's the way you operate with coaches. It's the way, there isn't one way. And I think, often in our world, as you know, the sports psychology, mental skills world can be, a den of wolves at times. People are really critical of the way other people operate and what have you done and da-da-da. I think it can be quite petty. So I think it's important to recognize, this is a guy doing incredible work. He does it in a way that's different from how I would do it. I can't imagine doing what he does, but yet you can have massive admiration and massive respect for the work, even though it might not fit something that you're able to deliver. And that's what I think, I learned off him was, geez, this guy's capacity is so beyond anything I could. And yes, the tool helps, but also just the ability to be across 5 teams. I struggle with 2 or 3 is keeping up and making sure I'm looking at things. And I think, you look at your personality, I'm a guy that would probably want to go deep with teams. I want to be embedded. I want to feel the culture. I want to feel what the leaders do. I want to have relationships. And that's just the way that I operate. And here you have someone who is probably able to achieve that. And if not at a deeper level and does it across multiple teams, huge respect.
Anything you were challenged by or anything you went, oh, that's not how I do it?
No, I think in large respects, I think when you have an experienced practitioner, there's a lot of agreement. You go, yeah, and they might give language for things that you've done. I suppose in my notes, I did write down a couple of things that I'm just going to recall for you here. I really like the stuff that he talked about, and this is probably a little bit new for me around this pure in the craft, around the event, then the avoidance, and then the reward over the current status. I thought that was quite good. So how do you create a reward for an athlete that gives them enough, motivation to go through the pain of, processing an event, which, the mini T, big T stuff. How do you go through that and you offer something that's more rewarding that will move them out of their current status of dissatisfaction? I thought that was brilliant, which is really a parenting strategy, right? Do you motivate by reward or do you motivate by shame? And creating reward, and there's studies about the snake if you put a pizza in there. So I thought there was some really good stuff that I wrote down anyway around, listen, we often diagnose, the issue, but we don't talk enough about the reward. So I thought that just from a pure practitioner was really good.
Yeah, I love that bit as well. And I can remember looking at the clock on that, I wanted to go deep. In fact, I wanted to go deeper in so many different areas, and I was conscious of, a 1 hour podcast. I think I could ring him up or dial him up and do another 2 or 3 podcasts, just going deep on 1 or 2 areas, and that is one.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was excellent. And I also thought his approach to the work was good. So like, I listen, I contribute, then I evaluate the contribution.
If there was another area you'd like to know more about, because I did say to Scott at the end, and he even said, we'll get on at some stage in the next 12 months or so and do another podcast. What would you like to know more of?
Oh, it's probably just me and my own issues, but I'm structured. Like I like ABC 1, 2, 3. And you were starting to pull structure out of him, which I don't know if he had articulated. He probably has, but like I reckon deeper into his approach, I think would be really interesting. And he acts like he wings it, but he doesn't, because when you asked him the questions, he knew exactly what he was trying to do. But I'd love to dive deeper into that.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. He doesn't wing it. He's pretty comfortable and chilled, but there's a lot of structure behind it all.
That's it for me, mate. It's a good podcast.
Okay, thank you, Walshy. There's our wrap for the reflection on the podcast. And if you enjoyed this podcast with Scott Goldman, I highly recommend you go back and listen to episode number 140 with Michael Gervais. We spoke about Michael a couple of times in this podcast. That's a really good one, especially if you're wanting to know more about the skills and a number of the mental performance and performance psychology techniques people do at the pointy end.